Well, hi. It's the strongest thing that I thought driving here today was like the relentlessness of change. I grew up on Long Island, and not that long after it had been paved over from potato fields and all these homes were built in the 60s there. And you can just see that happening here. And I was somewhere recently, I think it was in Arizona, where I remember visiting. It was probably right outside of Phoenix. And I remember visiting a place where you could see in the last 10 or 15 years, it had just been bulldozed and it was all shopping and condos. And I remember, driving by there and it was, relatively empty. And then, when I pulled onto the road coming here and you saw all of the signs for new housing. And I was reflecting upon how when I was a kid, I didn't recognize the lack of specialness of the area that I lived in. I thought there was something unique about it. And that, I lived in this new emerging kind of community. And at that point, I didn't realize just how common that was. That, old gets changed to something new, and it happens everywhere. But I took it as so real and so important and so mine and so special. And as I get older, I see how much I do that with my life, and how much everybody around me does that with their life. They exaggerate their small, little, self-centered perspective and make it really important. Not realizing it's just new housing developments, you know what I mean? It's so today you're this, and then now it's Brentwood, and then, it'll be somewhere else next time. And I was reflecting upon that because I think that's what makes the spiritual journey or path close to impossible, is we want to be special. And we desperately want to fantasize that there's unique, special stuff about us. And we don't want to relinquish that fantasy. We want to hold it. I'm going to say 30 years ago, I remember I was in college in upstate New York, and it was the end of my time there. And it was beautiful. It was just this gorgeous little town in the Catskill Mountains, and I was walking above the town because I was probably leaving to come out to California. And I was walking in the town and I was looking down at the town from the hills, and it looked like a movie set. It was just, it's just some buildings and, nothing grand, but when you're in it, it seems so real. And then when you look above it, you see mostly open space, but just some buildings and signs and homes, but it looked much less substantial. And I remember thinking, wow, okay, so we humans were so frightened of our inevitable non-being, at least not in this body, that we exaggerate the solidity of all the things around. And I thought, these were all inchoate things. As I've gotten older, I've seen how deeply pervasive that is and how difficult it is to let go of that, to let spirit in. You know, if we're so solid and we're so real and we're so important, where's room? You know, the other day, and I think it was the other day, I remember reading, these are just random reflections. I remember reading, or I saw reading that in the Democratic primaries now, or the polls, it's now basically Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders competing. And the humor of it was they were saying that in people under 50, Bernie Sanders has a small lead. In people over 50, Joe Biden is swamping Bernie Sanders. And I was laughing at, because in the people over 50, a huge segment of them, you know, a moment ago back in the day, were saying they don't trust anybody over 30. And so the baby boomers had become the crotchety, immobilized old farts that they made believe they were protesting against. And this has nothing to do with politics, but Joe Biden's whole appeal is, let's go back. You know, when it was safe and stable under Obama. And Bernie Sanders wants to change things. And people above 50 don't want change. Because we're solid, and we're scared, and we're real, and we're making believe that we understand. Well, actually, we're acknowledging that we don't understand. That's why it has to stay the same, and everything changes. There's probably the strongest line around this vague concept that I ever heard was Ram Dass's line of, there's two beings left in the universe, God and what's left of my ego. And I don't know that there's a stronger spiritual statement. Every inch of you and I that wants to be separate, distinct, unique, special, important, gratified, glorified, there's that, and then there's spirit. And every moment that we spend trying to make ourselves important, we're shoving, or we're redefining that space of what's left of my ego and spirit. And it's why, for most people that you know, and probably even yourself, progress is so limited. Spiritual progress. Because who wants to give up our specialness? And who wants to give up our glories? I don't. Or at least much of the time I don't. But it's interesting because it's not the glories that we have to give up. It's the need for specialness that gets in the way. It's the, wow, look at me. Except if we really said, wow, look at me, it would be very different. It would be, wow, look at this tiny speck of intelligence that has manifested for a short period of time and will go bye-bye and will be taken over by other specks of intelligence. And within a certain amount of time, nobody will remember that this speck of intelligence existed. But look at me while I'm here. I want to be a really important speck of intelligence. There's another wonderful, I remember Ram Dass talking about this a lot, using the Buddhist wheel of samsara. And the Buddhist conception is that Like everything, you just take berths and you go around and around and around and around and around, and then you get tired of it and you want to get off the wheel, because after a while you recognize the pointlessness of your desires. And Ram Dass's image is that on the outside of the wheel there's change. And on the inside of the wheel, there's no change. There's just formlessness and eternity and stability, but it's not identified with anything. And he talks about how, and that's, a little bit when I was listening to the Marianne Williamson thing, that, we live on the outside of the wheel. So what's new? That's our outside of the wheel question. What's new in your life? What's different? What did you do that's important, even if it's not important, like where'd you take a vacation? Or did you buy a new car? Or, these are irrelevancies that we make into important. But on the outside of the wheel, it's all the day-to-day stuff where we're trying to increase this little speck's importance. And on the inside of the wheel, there's no need for that. And Ram Dass refers to, like, for a moment, like you'll have a meditation moment where you'll recognize that you don't need to grasp for anything. And you don't need to make anything wrong at all, not even for a second. Like, it's all okay. Your opinion on it is not needed. There's those moments, and then if you're really lucky, you recognize that it's all you have are opinions on something immense. That's all you have. That's your ego, separate from spirit, is an opinion about whether the totality works for the point of view of your ego. That's all you got. And that's what most of us spend all of our time sharing, is our little tiny opinion on eternity or enormity or something. And we love it. I mean, that's its job. But every now and then you'll have a moment where you'll really recognize that it's okay without your opinion. That there's something so much deeper and so much more okay that you don't have to comment on it. That you somehow you need to relax and let it be. Just relax. And then, the ego comes rushing back in and says, well, wait a second, my opinion's important. And it's real, It's like, and it's true, and my ego's opinion is better than everybody else's ego's opinion. Because then you find somebody whose ego's opinion is different than yours, and you argue with them. But then you remember that this is what Ram Dass's statement was. The more you can practice being in the center of that, the less you have to fight. Because you recognize that your opinion and your specialness are just taking that center and running away from it to be on the outside. And like being right, and this is not arguing to be wrong, it's just needing to be right, causes suffering all over the place. Yesterday, my partner's kid, I think is going to turn 12 shortly. And I already raised kids, so it's weird having an 11-year-old running around. But so the kid was with the dad, and they were shopping for something. And I have no interest in shopping, just none. If you could have negative interest in something, I have that. But the kid was with the dad and sending the mom pictures of some boots that she wanted to buy. And now with the cell phone, you can in real time show mom what it is that you want to buy. So on her phone comes this picture of a boot, a boot with whatever, and the mom's looking at it, and she shows me, and I actually felt sad watching another generation of young people get seduced by pointlessness, by consumerism, by vanity, by fear. Not even a 12-year-old girl. And I realized, but it wasn't just the one child. It was, again, the endless human progression of generations that doesn't change much, where there isn't that much growth, and where there isn't, to me, that much holding what's in the center, always on the outside. How do I look in these boots? Are these boots good boots? And God bless boots, but it's what it doesn't say. And then the other piece that I saw was with she has two children, one of whom is first year of high school, and this young girl who's first year of middle school. And I noticed that these kids are, like all of us, in the what's left of my ego, not spirit. They're being trained to be about self. I don't see many of the questions from either of them about what can I do to serve? Who can I help? There's so much suffering in this world. What could I do? They're interested in boots or in their dances. And so we're, in the affluent parts of our world, I don't think we're doing our kids much service. I mean, that's just me being a crotchety, I've never been that materially oriented. But I do see how clearly it's bolster the self. Make yourself important. Talk about yourself. Find ways to magnify yourself. Be the best you can be. And generation after generation hasn't led to much. There's not that much of, kids. I mean, I'm just talking about where we live. There are plenty of places where you need to help kids have a self, because you have to have a self before you can relinquish it. But these kids who are prosperous, many of their parents went to Stanford, they already have too much self. And so I don't see in their environment or education, kid, you have enough. You're already at the top of the food chain. You should be sharing. If you, the most affluent, pampered people in the world, are not being taught generosity, who's gonna be? Who's gonna do that? You have more than you need. But that's that spirit, or what's left of my ego. And I remember reading, 30 years ago, in New York, there was this very challenging issue that the wealthy parents in New York City were choosing to send their kids to private school, which benefited their particular children, but ruin the New York City school systems. Because the wealthier parents could opt out, set up their own separate things, but the whole deteriorated because they were no longer there funding it and taking care of it. And so from an individual sense, it made some sense. From the part of the whole, it was destructive. And that's almost how we're taught to be. Self first, us first, me first. And why, again, that Rabbi Hillel statement of, if I'm not for me, nobody will be, is true. But if I'm only for me, I'm of no use. And so this issue is at the heart of spiritual life. It's why it's so damn hard. And it's why most people resist. When you sit to meditate, anybody who does, what you do is you meet yourself, which most people don't want to do, meet themselves. It's scary to close your eyes, to reduce sensation, and try to focus on one thing. It's really hard to do that because the only thing you're left with is you. And you see very clearly who you are. Most of us don't want to do that because it requires so much work to shape it back to the kind of person we want to be. So we stay distracted, and we stay in the worldly, I'm going to say, lowest common denominator of what's best for me or us. One of the ways that this stuff first came to me, I think I was a kid, and I remember going into people's homes and seeing all the pictures on the walls of their families. And I would think, part of me thought, how strange this is. That the pictures on the wall are usually of 2 generations, at most 3. So basically, we put up an homage to our ego on the walls. Like, hi, ego, look at me. I'm the center of things. Because we only take the little tiny piece of this evolution that's about us. So on the wall is maybe when we're middle-aged, is us in the center of kids with maybe some parents. But we make believe it's real, even though the next people who own our homes are going to do the same thing. Different kids, different pictures, same transitory experience. And we're all involved in this mass hallucination, that it's stable, and that we're the center of something, rather than just this whole long evolutionary quay of something that we're part of. And the piece that I'll end on is that the research on happiness, without being explicitly spiritual, is also starting to recognize, like Viktor Frankl's illumination, that if you strive too hard for personal happiness, you don't get it. Like, if just being good for you doesn't lead to good, it's a wider lens, service, kindness, appreciation, generosity, forgiveness, compassion. Those are not about just us, me. And those are why those are spiritual qualities. Because they ask us to, like, not just be self-absorbed. Not just have pictures of us on the wall at some level. And not just make believe we're the center of something with, hey, here's me with my kids, and there's my parents, and the rest of the universe, and the 5,000 years of evolution before, those don't exist, and the whole future is unknown. It's just me. And then my kids will have pictures where my grandparents will be gone, and I'll be the grandparents, and then we just keep on, running through the game where we put ourselves at the center. But the longer I pay attention to this, the less that I see that it makes people happy. And because it's such a vulnerable enterprise, because we all know this self is temporary. And the more we can try to get outside the self for our satisfaction, or widen the self for our satisfaction, it relieves some of the stress on us. It relieves some of the stress of trying to extract happiness from a temporary, aging, frail experience. And it makes the net a little wider. But again, that statement from Ramdas is to me very, very profound, that what's left in this universe is what's left of my ego, and he said God. I think of it as spirit. And from my modest exploration, when I can extract myself just a little bit from that absorption with self, and just identify a little bit more with the center that doesn't need this obsession, it's more peaceful. And the simplest example would just be traffic. So if the self is stuck in a car, stuck in traffic, that could be a catastrophe for the self. If it's just cars waiting, which they do all over the place, it's not such a catastrophe. It's just you're in a quay. You're just there in a car. And the last thing I'll say, which was my own antidote to being stuck in traffic and not liking it, and this was not pretty. I was sitting there once outside of Stanford. 101 is being constructed there probably for 100 years. And it's been constructed just about as long as I've been going there. And I was sitting in traffic, and I was stuck, and I was trying to get to campus, and I was getting agitated. But then I had the uncomfortable thought of, well, what's the problem with traffic? And I realized that the problem with traffic is I have to spend 5 more minutes with me. Like, I'm in a box. I want to get out of the box. I'm stuck in the box just with me. That's what's causing me suffering. That's not good. Like, it shows the unhappiness in me and the lack of peace in me. If I don't like spending 5 more minutes just with me, then I need to get out of my box. And so it's, again, these are hard questions about self and other, and the need to push ourselves. The only other thing is that wheel of samsara, they all refer to gently over time. as you spend more time in that center, it gets more appealing. That the quiet place has a nourishment that the grasping part doesn't. Anyway, thank you very much.